it is important that we reflect on the incredible career of Johnny Bach. Mr. Bach, a coaching icon on the collegiate, professional, and international levels, was one of the greatest basketball minds of all time. A defensive specialist, he has been credited with helping the Bulls, Chicago Bulls, win 3 consecutive NBA championships, and he is the greatest Fordham University basketball coach, the winningest coach of all time. He's a member of the class of 1948, and that makes him a true Fordham man. The Johnny Bach Award is presented to an individual whose life has had a substantial and lasting impact on the sport of basketball, and a person who best emulates Coach Bach's drive and passion for excellence. Tonight, Fordham basketball honors Jay Bilas with the 2019 Johnny Bach Award.
Go off the cuff with you, Jay, okay? So, for those that may have known, I challenged Jay to a rap and just to see what he was going to get back, so I'm still waiting for that response, but I actually spoke to Jay about when he got involved with women's basketball back in 2000, and you had reminded me that you had done men's first, then women, and he did a terrific job. I mean, one, I said, you know, it's interesting because I felt it was more than 1 year because it was such an influence that you had on our game. And then, you know, with the men's basketball, I know having 3 sons, just watching you and listening to you, and obviously following your career, you know, at Duke, and then seeing you be a commentator and sharing stories with you about Rebecca Lobo and things of that nature. I just think it's fascinating because I think you give a great idea from a perspective of both a player, coach. I know Wendy said he coached Anthony for a little bit. Actually, I think maybe Wendy might be even more important because she's an unbelievable painter, so I got to see some of her abstract art, so that was incredible. But you've been such an influence on the game. I personally love following you. I think what you're able to add to our game from a perspective of, you know, both a player and a coach has been outstanding. So I'm excited to be part of presenting you this award. I'm excited that you were able to be here as part of this unbelievable evening. I don't think there's anybody better. I had the chance to meet Johnny Bach way back in the day when I was an assistant coach, and he was an incredible man. He took the time to have dinner, and I met with him when I was out at one of the Final Fours, and I don't think there's anybody that could be more deserving than you for this award. So.
All right, Jay, if you want to come up, we're going to do a little presentation of the award right now, and we're going to do a Q&A to follow up. Coaches, you want to come up here and present the award for Jay for a little photo op? And Dave and Father McShane, if you want to join for the photo opportunity as well. One more time, everybody, for Jay Bilas. Have a round of applause. He's going to get the same type of reception when he walks into the NCAA's office. All right, well, Jay, I asked the student athletes and the coaches earlier what the feelings are like for them on the dawn of a new season. For you in your position right now, what are some of the emotions that you're going through?
Well, I'm excited as well, John. And first of all, thank you. I'm a huge admirer of yours, and we've been friends for a long time. And it's nice to be here. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here. Not that anybody here would remember this, but years ago I did a number of games here at Fordham. The Atlantic 10 was my beat when I first started with ESPN. So when Nick McCarchick was here, and I'd come up and do games when Bavon Robin was playing here, and Smush Parker and all that. So I've been spent a number of games at Rose Hill Gym and doing A-10 games. And I first heard of Fordham. I grew up in Los Angeles, and when I was a kid, there was no internet when you were a kid, so I read a lot of Xander Hollander books, and I read about Vince Lombardi being here at Fordham, and 7 blocks of granite and all that. And, so it was always a thrill for me to come here when I first got going in broadcasting. And it's an incredible honor for me to be here tonight and to be presented with such a prestigious award. Johnny Bach was one of the all-time greats, and I had the pleasure of meeting him when he was with the Chicago Bulls, and I couldn't be prouder to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, before we look forward to the 1920 college basketball season, I do want to ask you about something that happened at the end of last year, because you were in my thoughts during this day. Probably pound for pound, inch for inch, the best game we had last season was the round of 32 matchup between Duke and Central Florida, and your tentacles were all over that game because you played with Johnny Dawkins, and you obviously also played and worked for later Coach K. Just for you emotionally, I know you always tell me that you don't care who wins, but what was it like considering your connection to those two coaches, just watching that game and watching it unfold at the end?
Yeah, Johnny Dawkins and I played together for 4 years. We were in the same recruiting class, and Coach K, my first year at Duke was his third. And so when we got there, he was on a little bit of shaky ground, and didn't really realize it when he was recruiting us that things were that shaky. But when the game was going on, I was actually watching the game with my wife Wendy. I just happened to be home that night, traveling. From traveling, and watched the game and thought it was one of the great games I'd seen all year long. And then when Johnny's son Aubrey, when that tip he had to win the game rolled out, that's when it hit me. I was like, one of my best friends in the world was that close to having something that would have been or could have been career changing for him. And that's when it hit me. And it was a I usually don't have emotional experiences at games anymore. Like, I love going to games, I love the competition, I love every part of it, but I haven't gone to a game in 20, 30 years where I've had a rooting interest, except when my son plays, and that was pretty much it. So I don't really care who wins, and that was the one game after the game was over, I was like, geez, that would have been good if that went in for Johnny, but it's awfully nice, when you don't have skin in the game. I think you appreciate. I've learned to appreciate the game more than when everything was so one-sided, in my view. So that's actually been a nice part of this job. You know how it is. People think that when your alma mater's playing that you're sitting there on the edge of your seat, and you're really not, because that's not what our job's about. And it's hard to explain that to people, but you know what I'm talking about.
Well, and that's not the only exciting thing that you had since the last regular season concluded. You were part of an unbelievable project for the launch of the ACC Network as part of the class that saved Coach K. And if you guys haven't seen this, it's an unbelievable 2-hour production. I know you've been at ESPN for a long time. Where does that rank among your most favorite projects or games that you've covered and been a part of?
Yeah, I was an executive producer on that, and executive producer is a great title because you don't do anything. So it's fantastic. All I did was make some phone calls to help facilitate some interviews. And so, we played at Duke 35 years ago. And the thing that was most interesting to me about that was, we had a great run there and started something that has turned out to be a pretty good thing. But none of us communicated before we sat down for interviews with the producer, director, and the whole thing of this piece. And I was amazed that, one, everybody's memory was so good because all the details were right. You figured that some of us would screw it up and nobody did, which was surprising. And the other part of it was sort of the emotional experience of it, of reliving all of that. Because even though it was only, our playing lives were only 4 years there, like what you were saying before about 4 years of your career with 40 years of your life, that was literally true for us. And those are the guys I played with are my best friends in the world. They were at the time and have remained so. And that's an emotional connection that you can't explain to anyone. It's something you have to go through. And to be able to go back there and have your coach still coaching. I went to college. My first year of college was 1982-83, and my coach is still where I played. And that's extraordinary. I think it's only Duke and Syracuse that have that, which is it's almost really kind of hard to fathom, and very, very fortunate that that's been sort of my life in the game.
What do you find is the biggest difference in the Mike Krzyzewski that's getting ready to start the 1920 season versus the one that you played for in the early 80s?
He dresses better. He drives a much nicer car. He's very different in that he is established now, and he has all this wealth of experience. I mean, I've never minded saying this, that the players that are playing for him now are playing for a much better coach than I played for. But that's as it should be. That you would hope that someone in a 35, 40-year career is going to be better later than earlier. But I wouldn't trade the 4 years I had under him because of the time period and what it was really like. It was fantastic. It was a little grittier than it is now, but it was great. He's not as volatile now as he was then, but his value system is exactly the same. And he's never lost. The thing that's amazed me about it is two things. One, he's never lost sort of his passion for the day-to-day grind of what it takes to be good. And then his hair never changes color. Because that's when he's going to quit. When his hair changes color, that's when he'll retire.
You know, it's funny, you used the word value, and values are things that you use not just obviously through your college years, but through the rest of your life. And, you know, I thought watching that, you know, thing on the ACC network about the class that saved Coach K, and it seemed like you were building towards winning a national championship, and you ultimately came up just short against Louisville in 1986. I'm curious, though, from where you sit right now as a parent, as a father, as a husband, do you learn more about life dealing with the adversity of a loss versus a triumph that big, maybe at 22 years of age?
I prefer the triumph. I was an assistant coach on Coach K's staff when Duke won their first championships. So I was there 90, 91, 92. And so 91, 92, Duke won the whole thing back to back. And Tommy Amaker was a teammate of mine at Duke, and we were on that 1986 team that lost in the championship game at Louisville. And we were asked by Johnny Dawkins, actually, who's in the NBA. He called and asked Tommy, you know, does it kind of take it away? And Tommy said, no, it doesn't. There's something different about winning as a coach and winning as a player. As a player, you get 4 shots at it, and it might be less than that. And there's nothing that duplicates the experience of being a player. And that's one of the things that, John, that's always interested me about the way you hear basketball talked about today by some administrators. I always hear, and I'm sure you do the same, sort of this idea that only 2% of basketball players go on to play professionally or something like that. And I'm not going to argue with that number, but when I hear that, it's almost like it diminishes the experience when they say that, well, only 2% go on, that so the rest of you, well, like there are a lot of people who played in high school and college that have spent their whole life in this game. And I've spent my whole life around it. You know, Stephanie, Jeff, you spent your whole life in this game, teaching, coaching, administrators. You may work in the front office of an NBA team. You may coach in high school. This game goes way beyond playing, and that's one of the things that was so valuable to me. Is, you know, from the first time I dribbled the ball, I loved it, and I love it more now than I did then. But if I hadn't had that experience and being with the guys I was with and the coaches I played for, I wonder what I would have done outside of basketball. I don't think I would have had the same drive to achieve things in school or law school, or, you know, I practiced law for a number of years. All these things that I've been fortunate enough to be able to do. If it weren't for basketball, I don't think I would have had the same view of things. And so I've always been very grateful that little ball. Because, you know, I was able to literally bounce that ball around the world playing, and then it's been my professional life, which has been a really neat thing.
Well, as you get set for your professional life, that's going to kick off Tuesday night here at the Garden, I'm curious your take on this. It feels like, and I've seen about 30 schools so far in the preseason, there's been a passage in our sport. 15 of the top 20 scorers from the SEC have moved on. 13 of the top 20 scorers from your old conference, the ACC, has moved on. The teams that have won national championships, they've always kind of had, at least for the last 5 years, surefire, long-time pros. Michigan State's the consensus #1 team. Doesn't seem like they have a surefire, long-time pro. Is the field as leveled as you can remember starting a new season that we've seen in quite some time?
It's as uncertain, I would say, because to your point, 13 of the 15 AP All-Americans from last year are gone. And we have that every once in a while. Usually you're going to have some returnees. You got to get a pad and pencil out to try to figure out who came back. But there's a beauty to that too. Like I was talking to somebody recently saying that things are really going to be, he said to me, things are really going to be different this year. And I was like, yeah, isn't that great? It is going to be different. And there are, I think it's more like 2010, maybe 2011, where we thought, hey, there's some really good teams out there, man, really good players, but we didn't know. And certainly at the start of the year, I don't remember in 2011 thinking, well, UConn and Kemba Walker are going to win this thing. We're going to have somebody, a team is going to emerge that we don't expect. I'm sure that the 4 teams we have here at the Champions Classic with Michigan State, Kentucky, Kansas, and Duke, I'm sure those 4 will be in the conversation the whole year as long as everybody stays healthy. But the beauty of the game is there's a void right now that really good and potentially great players can step into. And we didn't know 2 years ago, or maybe you did, I didn't know that Trae Young was going to be Trae Young. And not like that. Yeah. And so I know we're going to have that. And I know it's the same in football. They like to think they're different, but they're not. Like nobody knew that Kyler Murray was going to be the best player last year and Baker Mayfield the year before. So I'm really excited for what we're going to see. But more than anything, I'm really excited for, you mentioned that you've been to 30 places. When you get to see and meet the players that play the game and the coaches that teach these players, to your point earlier, it's impossible to have a rooting interest when you see how hard these players work, how much they want it. They lay it on the line, not only every night, but every practice. And so you go watch a practice and you go, man, you're so impressed by the commitment you see individually and collectively from these players and coaches. That's my favorite part of this, and I know it'll deliver because it always does.
You've obviously been very outspoken on a number of topics with players' rights, and we're going to get to that in a second. But you mentioned something interesting earlier. You need a pad and paper to find out who's going to come back to school every spring, because there's a lot of kids right now who aren't going to be drafted, and they still leave school anyway. We had 3 kids last year leave a UCLA team that was 17 and 16. The head coach was fired in the middle of the season. And they're not really doing big things on NBA rosters right now, but they chose not to come back to school. You obviously put a great value on your education based on where you went to school and obviously the values that you have, but do you think has education ever been less valued right now in our society among athletes than it is right now?
No, I think it is valued. I think whatever a young person now, the way they look at the business of sports is what we've done, not what they're about. So to answer your question, the folks in the room that are my age or older, I'm 55. How many of you had friends that played minor league baseball? See, a number of hands are going up that played minor league baseball. So back when we were younger, and I'm a lot older than you, it was considered acceptable for a player to leave high school and go ride on buses for almost no money to chase a dream to play baseball, when baseball was really the national pastime. We have, and maybe at Fordham, I don't know what all of your majors are, but there are people at great institutions around the country right now that are in the arts, that are, my wife happens to be a professional artist, but you have artists and musicians and actors and people who want to sing on Broadway, whatever it may be. And we don't tell them, well, don't chase that dream because there's a very small chance that you're going to make it, never make any money in that. But somehow a basketball player, especially now, we look down on that, and I don't. One of the things that I think we're missing, and as the NCAA, and the NCAA I mean all the member institutions, not just the folks in Indianapolis, is that we're putting this all or nothing stance on it. You're either going to be Bill Bradley or Shane Battier, or we don't want you at all. And that's the feeling I get from some of the rhetoric that we have. Instead of, listen, chase your dream. You can be a great student too, and get a great education. You can do both. If you choose to chase that and leave school to chase your dream in basketball, I would hope that we'd welcome them back. And that's where I think our policies need to be, is what can we do to welcome those players back, that if you and I think, well, maybe they made a mistake in chasing after this, how can we help them come back to school? If we really believe that education is important, because we brought them in the first place. And I think we're missing the boat there. Not everybody, because a lot of schools do a great job with it, but I think overall, the entire structure, we can do much better. And that's where I think more of our energy needs to be, if I could be so bold to say that.
If a member of your family caught you talking in your sleep over the last month, what are the chances are that the 3 words that would be coming out of your mouth be name, image, and likeness?
I don't know. Probably 100%. We're living in an interesting time right now. But I think this was foreseeable. I think this has been building for a long time, and I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. It's an extraordinary, this is a wonderful endeavor. Like, college sports are great, high school sports are great, professional sports are great. Sports are great. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with coaches making money. There's nothing wrong with TV contracts, shoe contracts. There's nothing wrong with any of this. We have to wrap our heads around the idea that every student on campus, every non-athlete student, is allowed their fair market value in whatever field of endeavor they choose, whether they're on scholarship or not. The only one that's not is an athlete. And we have to ask ourselves if we think that's right. And I happen to believe it's not. Somehow our rhetoric has come to say that the quote-unquote revenue-producing sports are paying for everyone else. I think that's demonstrably false. That there are over 1,100 institutions in the NCAA umbrella. Not that many of them, of the 1,100, make this kind of money. And yet all these Division II and Division III programs have sports. How do they have sports if football and basketball aren't making money to pay for it? So when we talk about this name, image, and likeness thing, and then we say, well, if the players get this, it's going to hurt women's sports. It's a pretty paternalistic thing for us to say. That geez, I hope us men can keep making money so the women can play. That's an absurd notion. And so we need to stop this, and just each institution do what you want to do. If you want to have 27 sports, have 27. You want to have 21, have 21. If you want to pay your coaches big money, pay them. You want to pay them less and allocate your resources elsewhere, do it that way. It's really not as hard as we're making it. And this name, image, and likeness thing, we can argue about it all we want to, but it's decided. And governments are getting involved, Congress is getting involved, and right now, based upon what the NCAA is doing, I think that the courts are going to get back involved. And we're going to take a lot of time talking about stuff that has nothing to do with what's great, and what we love is just watching these guys play, watching these kids play. So hopefully we can get back to that. I know we will, starting on Tuesday, and then we can, some of the policy stuff we can keep for later.
Only one way to follow that up. I was with Ian Eagle once last year, I think it was January, and he told me that he worked with Bill Rafter on the Nets for 8 seasons, and his liver felt like it was 12. I'm curious, after all those years on Big Monday, how would you describe your liver?
Improving. So Bill Rafter and Sean McDonough and I worked together for, I don't know, must have been 15 years. So every Monday we would get together, and then I would stagger to the airport on Tuesday morning, not having gone back to my room. I'll just tell you one, so you can understand exactly who Bill Raftery is for those of you who don't know him. Every Monday we would get together and do our big Monday game, and usually Raftery would be coming from a CBS game over the weekend. So he would work with Vern Lundquist doing a game maybe on Saturday or Sunday, and our ritual was we would meet for lunch on Monday, then we would go to the team shoot-arounds, and then go to the game, and then whatever happened afterwards we couldn't remember. So we're in Philly doing a Villanova game. One of the things that Raftery likes to do best is bust Sean McDonough's chops at every opportunity. So we get to lunch, and Sean sits down. He got there a little bit later than us, and he sits down and he says, Bill, how was the game this weekend? He says, how's Vern Lundquist? And Raftery says, we had a great time, Sean. Since we went out after the game, he says we had a couple bottles of wine, and we talked about the business, and we talked about all the great broadcasters. Your name didn't come up. That was basically what happened every time we had lunch. Was he was just taking a swing at Sean.
Final thing, I remember you were a guest on my podcast a couple of years ago. We were just talking about the route that your life has taken. You know, you told me you miss competing. That was the big thing. You didn't necessarily miss coaching, but you didn't miss competing. What have you gotten out of broadcasting that maybe you didn't expect you would get when you decided to take this career path?
I've learned a ton. My upbringing in the game, you learn the game from the people who teach and coach you. So I had great mentors and teachers, and chief among them was Coach K. But I learned the game a certain way. I learned man-to-man defense, I learned motion offense. And so and it was a great way, and is a great way. When I started broadcasting, I would go to, you know how it is, these coaches let us in. And so you're going to practices, and coaches will let us into film sessions and scouting reports, and I sat and watched countless hours of film with Bob Knight and Tom Izzo, whatever. And you learn there are different ways to do it. And we didn't do it that way. That's a good way. And you started picking things up, saying, you know what, if I ever did this again, I would do it differently. I would do it differently than I was taught. I'd keep some of the core things, but I would take this and take that. You start to realize, and I learned a long time ago, that there are so many genius level people in this game that have a certain way of doing things that may not be the way you learned it, but it's great. And that's where you can't do what we do and be biased. It's impossible after you see how great all these people are and how much they put into it. So that's what I've learned more than anything. And I think I've learned to stay in the moment. I was taught that when I was a player, that to concentrate on what you're doing while you're doing it, be where your feet are. There's nothing, have a next play mentality. There's nothing you can do about what just happened. Be there for this play and the next play. And I've always tried to carry that forward with me, but I think as I've gotten older, I really, instead of worrying about trying to work my way up or whatever, do the job in front of you. There's no game that's more important than my game. And it was the same when I was doing Canisius versus Siena, in the MAC, as it is doing Duke Carolina. This is my game. There's nothing more important than the game I'm doing. And when these players, all these players here at Fordham, when they go to practice tomorrow or game Tuesday, there's nothing more important than your game. There's no program that's more that's more special than your program because it's yours. And that to me has been the most important lesson I've ever learned. Is if you want something that other people are gonna think is special, well, you better treat it as special yourself. And you're never gonna have better relationships than you have with your teammates. It never gets better than this. And that's not I'm not trying to make a value judgment. It's just you will never have a time in your life where you are surrounded by people you're totally invested with, and you'll never have staff Like, you'll never have a staff that's totally invested in making you better. Once you leave this situation, then you're gonna be paying for that. You have to have some trainer come in and treat you poorly to get you in better shape. Now you got this every day. So it's a special thing. You have to treat it as special, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about a final round of applause for the Johnny Bach Award?